Rosalind Vaughn-Thatcher had always believed that after 47 years of marriage, the one thing she could count on was the quiet loyalty of the man who had promised to love her until death. Instead, at 71 years old, she received a stack of forged documents, a divorce filing already approved by a judge, and the cold smile of a husband who had been systematically stealing from her for 3 decades. Stripped of her home, her savings, and even the family inheritance her own grandmother had left her, with nothing but an old leather suitcase and a promise her grandmother Philomena had whispered to her 50 years ago, when Rosalind was just 21, she walked alone down the cracked dirt road toward the abandoned Vaughn Orchard, a place her husband had always called worthless, overgrown land, but that Rosalind had always called sanctuary. Garrick Thatcher and his young fiancée Camilla laughed openly as they watched her walk away, her thin shoulders slightly stooped beneath the weight of the single suitcase. They thought she was walking toward her own humiliation, that she had finally accepted her place as the discarded wife, the foolish old woman who had trusted the wrong man for too many years. Little did they know that by turning the rusted brass key in the lock of that root cellar seal for 5 decades, Rosalind was not simply opening a weathered wooden door. She was unearthing a truth that the Thatcher family had spent 60 years desperately trying to bury beneath layers of stolen wealth and manufactured respectability. What Rosalind would find inside that ancient cedar crate was not gold coins or family jewels. It was something infinitely more devastating. A wedding dress that was never worn and a bundle of yellowed letters that would bring one of the most powerful old money families in New Hampshire crashing down before the autumn leaves finish falling. If you have ever been betrayed by someone who swore to love you, if you have ever watched the person you trusted most twist truth into lies, if you have ever been made to feel small, foolish, and disposable by the very family you built your whole life around, then this story is for you. Prepare to discover what happens when a 71-year-old woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose finds the secret her grandmother preserved with fierce love to save her on the darkest day of her life. Subscribe now, because what Rosalind does with this truth will make you believe that justice, no matter how long delayed, always finds its way home. Welcome to Dreams Don't Age. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rosalind Vaughn-Thatcher stood in the marble foyer of the house she had lived in for 34 years, holding a manila envelope that weighed less than a pound but felt like it contained the entire weight of her wasted life. Outside the tall bay windows, the late September sun was painting the maple trees of Willowmere, New Hampshire, in shades of amber and crimson, a beauty so profound it felt almost cruel, the kind of beauty that refuses to pause even when your entire world is collapsing. Behind her, her husband Garrick stood with his hands in the pockets of his cashmere cardigan, the same cardigan she had bought him 2 Christmases ago, watching her read the divorce papers with the calm, patient expression of a man who had already won a game she had not even known was being played. "I don't understand," Rosalind said quietly, her voice steadier than she would have expected. "The house is in my name. The orchard property my grandmother left me is in my name. The investment accounts, Garrick, my father put those in my name before we were even married. Were in your name," Garrick corrected gently, as though he were explaining a simple concept to a confused child. "Past tense, Roz. You signed the transfers years ago. You just didn't know you were signing them." She looked up at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time in nearly 5 decades of marriage, she saw the man underneath the warm smiles and the thoughtful anniversary gifts and the Sunday morning pancakes. She saw the patient, calculating stillness of a man who had been playing a very long game. His pale blue eyes, which she had once described in a love letter as the color of winter sky over the lake, held nothing now. Not malice, not shame, not even triumph. Just the flat, accounting gaze of a person checking numbers on a ledger. "The papers I signed for the refinance," she said slowly, piecing it together in real time. "The estate reorganization after my father died. The trust restructuring when you said we needed to protect ourselves from taxes. All of them. Every single one." Garrick lifted his chin slightly, as though proud of his own careful patience. 31 years of signatures, Roz. I used to think I would lose my nerve. But you never read a single document. Not one. You just sign where I pointed. I used to sit in my study afterward and wonder how a woman as educated as you could be so fundamentally trusting. It was almost touching. At that moment, the front door opened and Camilla Beecham walked in without knocking, a small overnight bag in her hand and a bright, relaxed smile on her 40-year-old face. She was wearing Rosalind's favorite emerald scarf, the silk one Rosalind had inherited from her mother. Camilla had clearly taken it from the front closet where it had hung for 20 years. She walked past Rosalind as though Rosalind were a piece of outdated furniture someone had forgotten to remove, kissed Garrick on the mouth with practiced familiarity, and set her overnight bag down on the same bench where Rosalind's suitcases had been packed and lined up that morning. "Is she almost done?" Camilla asked Garrick, not bothering to lower her voice. "The movers are coming at 3, and I'd really like to start measuring for the new drapes before it gets dark." Rosalind did not cry. She would later, alone, with a violence she had not known her body could produce. But in that moment, something inside her went perfectly still. She looked at the manila envelope in her hands, looked at the husband who had stolen from her for 3 decades, looked at the younger woman standing in her foyer, measuring for drapes, and she understood something with the clarity of ice. She had nothing left. Not the house, not the accounts, not the name she had carried for 47 years, not the children who had not returned her call for the past 6 days, which meant Garrick had already reached them and told them a story Rosalind had not yet heard. Not even, she suspected, her own version of the life she thought she had lived. But as she picked up the single old leather suitcase beside the door, the one she had packed with the few items that were undeniably, unquestionably hers, the clothes on her back, her mother's pearl earrings, a worn copy of Anna Karenina, and a small brass key on a tarnished chain, she remembered something she had not thought of in 50 years. A deathbed whisper from a grandmother whose face she could barely recall anymore. "When they take everything, Rosalind, go to the cellar. I left you what you will need. Promise me you will remember." Rosalind walked out of the marble foyer without looking back, past Camilla's laughter, past Garrick's satisfied silence, down the stone steps and out onto the maple-lined street where the October wind was already beginning to rise. She had a very long walk ahead of her. Rosalind had walked nearly a quarter mile down Elm Crest Avenue when she heard the soft purr of an engine behind her and the smooth hum of a car window lowering. She did not need to turn around and know who it was. She recognized the sound of Garrick's Mercedes the same way she recognized the sound of her own breathing. "Roz, this is ridiculous." His voice was patient, almost affectionate, the tone he used to use when he was persuading her to come to bed after a late night of reading. "Let me at least drive you somewhere. You cannot possibly walk with that suitcase. Where are you even going?" She kept walking. The asphalt pressed through the thin soles of her shoes, and the leather handle of the suitcase was already cutting a red line across her palm. She did not answer him. The car rolled alongside her at walking pace. Through the half-lowered window, she could see Camilla in the passenger's seat, one hand delicately covering a smile, the other holding up her phone as though she was about to film something interesting. "She's being dramatic," Camilla said, not quietly enough. "Let her walk. She'll call in an hour, begging to come back." "They always do." Garrick sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man burdened by an unreasonable wife. "Rosalind, at least tell me where you're going so I know you're safe. I still care about you, you know. I'm not a monster." She stopped walking. She set the suitcase down on the curb. She turned to face the man she had loved for 47 years and felt nothing at all, which was the most surprising discovery of the entire morning. "I'm going to my grandmother's orchard," she said. "The land you tried to make me sell to your developer friend 3 years ago. The land I refused to sign away because it was the only thing you ever asked for that I said no to. Do you remember, Garrick?" Something flickered across his face. The first genuine expression she had seen from him all day. It was not quite fear. It was the sharper, colder cousin of fear. It was calculation. "That property is condemned," he said, and for the first time his voice had an edge. "The cellar collapsed years ago. You cannot stay there, Roz. Be reasonable." "I have been reasonable for 47 years," Rosalind said quietly. "I am done being reasonable." She picked up a suitcase. She turned and kept walking. Behind her, she heard Camilla laugh loudly, a bright, practiced sound designed to be heard. She heard the engine rev. She heard the tires squeal as Garrick accelerated past her and out of sight, and she felt the small dust of his dismissal settle across her shoulders like a blessing. The walk to the Vaughn Orchard was nearly 4 miles. Under ordinary circumstances, Rosalind could not have managed it at her age, but the strange chemistry of rage and clarity in her blood kept her moving long after her legs should have given out. She walked past the Willowmere Town Square, past Hetty Stroud's little cafe, where the windows glowed warm yellow against the late afternoon, past the covered bridge at Miller's Creek that she had crossed 1,000 times in her youth. Halfway there, she sat down on a stone wall to rest, and that was when her phone buzzed for the first time in 6 days. It was her daughter, Trixie. "Mom, Dad told us everything. I cannot believe you would humiliate us like this." The divorce was going to be quiet. "Finian and I agreed with Dad that you clearly haven't been well for a while. Please just go to the Cedar Lane facility and let us handle the rest. You are embarrassing yourself." Rosalind read the message twice, then a third time. She thought about the 1,000 school lunches she had packed for Trixie, the nights she had stayed up sewing dance recital costumes by hand because Trixie insisted on something none of the stores carried. She thought about Finian's asthma attacks as a child, the emergency room visits, the way she had slept on the floor of his bedroom for 6 months because he was afraid to breathe alone. She did not reply. She turned the phone off completely, put it in the bottom of the suitcase, and kept walking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun was low and amber when Rosalind finally turned off the county road onto the overgrown gravel track that led up to the Vaughn Orchard. 50 years of neglect had worked their patient magic on the land. Apple trees she remembered as saplings were now massive, arthritic giants, their branches heavy with small, unpicked fruit that would feed the deer through winter. Wild asters grew waist-high between the rows. A fox watched her from the edge of the tree line, unafraid, as though the land had already decided she belonged here. The main farmhouse was gone. It had burned down in the autumn of 1978, taking her grandmother Philomena with it, a tragedy the family still spoke of in whispers when they spoke of it all. Only the fieldstone foundation remained, overgrown now with bittersweet vine and young birch saplings. But beyond the foundation, exactly where Rosalind remembered it, built into the slope of the hillside behind the vanished house, the old root cellar still stood. She set the suitcase down and reached into her coat pocket for the small brass key on its tarnished chain. The key had lived in the bottom of Rosalind's jewelry box for 50 years, resurfacing every few years when she rearranged the velvet tray or searched for an earring she had lost. Every time she found it, she had thought the same thing. One day I should ask someone what this opens. And every time, she had placed it gently back among the pearls and the old costume brooches, a small brass question she was never quite ready to answer. Now she understood why. The root cellar door was smaller than she remembered, the way everything from childhood always is. It was set into a wall of mortared fieldstone, framed by a heavy chestnut lintel, the whole structure half swallowed by the hillside behind it, so that the cellar itself extended deep into the earth like a secret the land had been keeping. Wild grapevine had grown across the door in thick green ropes, and Rosalind had to pull them aside with bare hands, her palms staining purple from the last of the autumn fruit. The padlock was the old kind, a heavy cast-iron body the size of her fist, gone rust-orange with 5 decades of New Hampshire weather. It hung from a simple latch, and when she touched it, a fine brown dust sifted down onto her shoes. She was certain, for a long moment, that the key would not fit, that her grandmother's promise had been the sweet, confused whisper of a dying woman, nothing more, that she had walked 4 miles with a suitcase cutting into her palm for nothing. She fit the key into the lock. It went in smoothly, as though the lock had been waiting. She twisted. The iron resisted. She twisted harder, using both hands, and with a low groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the tumblers turned and the shackle sprang open. Rosalind stood very still. Somewhere above her, A crow called once across the orchard, the sound absurdly loud in the quiet. She pulled the padlock free, set it carefully on the stone step, and put her shoulder to the door. It did not move. She put her weight into it. Nothing. She braced her feet against the stone threshold, wrapped both hands around the iron handle, and pulled with every ounce of strength her 71-year-old body could produce. And finally, with the slow, reluctant sigh of a thing that has been asleep for 50 years, the door gave way. The smell came first. Not the musty, stale air she had expected. Something entirely different. The dry, sweet ghost of apples, the cool, mineral breath of old stone, and layered beneath it all, unmistakable, the faint, dusty fragrance of apple blossom sachets. Rosalind's eyes filled with tears before she had fully understood why. It was Philomena's scent. Her grandmother had dried apple blossoms every spring and tucked them into cotton bags she placed in her closets and drawers. Rosalind had not smelled that particular perfume in half a century. She took the small flashlight from her suitcase and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed a space larger than she had remembered. A vaulted chamber of stone and heavy timber that stretched back into the hillside perhaps 20 feet. Shelves lined both walls, most of them empty now, though a few still held ancient mason jars whose contents had long since turned to dark slurry beneath their rusted lids. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. Someone had prepared this space before sealing it. Someone had known it might wait a very long time. At the far end of the cellar, against the back wall, sat a wooden crate. Not a trunk, not a hope chest, a crate. The kind of rough, honest cedar crate the orchard had once used to ship apples to market, her grandfather's operation in the years before the Thatcher family had destroyed it. The crate was perhaps 3 feet long, 2 feet deep, the wood pale where it had been protected from light and darkened to honey along the edges. On the lid, someone had burned the word Vaughn into the grain with a hot iron. Rosalind walked toward it slowly, her flashlight beam trembling so badly that the shadows seemed to breathe. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. When she reached the crate, she saw that it had been sealed in a way she had never seen before. Red wax, thick as a thumbnail, ran in a continuous bead around the entire seam of the lid, and pressed into the wax at 3 points were the small impressions of a silver thimble. Philomena's thimble, the one she had used every evening of her life until the fire took her, the one Rosalind had been told had been lost forever. She sank to her knees on the packed earth floor. She set the flashlight down and positioned it so the beam fell fully on the lid of the crate. She took a long, uneven breath. "I am here, grandmother," she whispered to no one. "I promised I would come. I am sorry it took me so long." She reached into the pocket of her coat, took out a small pair of folding scissors she always carried, the same one she had used for 4 decades of quiet needlework, and she carefully, reverently, broke the wax seal. The lid came loose with a soft sigh of cedar and age, and when Rosalind lifted it fully away and set it aside, her flashlight beam fell upon something she had not seen in 46 years, something she had believed destroyed in a fire, something that made her weep silently in the stone-cool dark. Her wedding dress. The dress was the color of fresh cream. Silk charmeuse with a high lace collar, long sleeves that tapered to a soft point at the wrist, and a simple bias-cut skirt that would have fallen just below the ankle. It was not a grand dress. It was a quiet dress, a 1979 dress. Philomena had sewn it herself over the course of 6 months, bent beside the window of the farmhouse kitchen, her reading glasses slipping down her nose while the afternoon light caught the hundreds of tiny French knots she had embroidered along the hem in the shape of apple blossoms. Rosalind lifted the dress from the crate with hands that shook so badly she almost dropped it. The silk was still cool, still supple, still perfect. Tissue paper rustled between its folds, stained faintly yellow at the edges but clean, and as she lifted the dress out into her lap, more of the apple blossom scent rose around her in a soft cloud. She pressed the fabric to her face and wept, and all the old grief that she had buried for 46 years came rising up out of the earth like groundwater after a long drought. The dress had never been worn. The wedding had never happened. And the reason it had never happened was a lie that had been told about her in the summer of 1979, a lie she had carried as her own private shame for nearly half a century. She had been 25 years old that summer. Her fiancé had been a young man named Corbin Lachapelle, the son of a French-Canadian stonemason who had moved to Willowmere to help restore the old mill on Miller's Creek. Corbin had hazel eyes that laughed before his mouth did, and hands that were perpetually rough from fitting stone, and he had loved Rosalind with the complete, uncomplicated devotion of a young man who had never learned that love was supposed to be difficult. They had met at the orchard. Ironically, at a pick-your-own afternoon, Philomena had organized to bring the new workers on the mill project together with the town. Corbin had spent the entire afternoon pretending to struggle with apple picking just so Rosalind would keep walking over to help him. By October, they were engaged. By the following spring, the wedding date was set, and Philomena had begun the dress. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, the Thatcher family had interfered. Reginald Thatcher Sr. was at that time the richest man in Willowmere, the owner of most of the town's commercial real estate, the chairman of the bank, the patron of the church, the man whose approval could make a family and whose disapproval could break one. He had a son named Garrick, fresh out of business school, who had been quietly courting Rosalind for 2 years without success, showing up at every town event, bringing her flowers she did not want, offering her rides she did not need. Rosalind had been polite. She had been firm. She had always made clear that her heart belonged to someone else. Reginald Thatcher Sr. did not accept that. What he had done, Rosalind would not fully understand until decades later, had been elegant in its cruelty. He had quietly called in a small construction loan the Lachapelle family had taken out at his bank to buy their modest house. He had then let it be known to the mill's contractor that any business continuing to employ Corbin Lachapelle would find its own financing reviewed. He had spread a soft, poisonous rumor through the church social hall that the Lachapelle boy was not who he seemed, that there were questions about his family back in Quebec, that a careful family would not want their daughter tied to such uncertain origins. And then he had visited Corbin personally. Rosalind had never been told the exact words that passed between them. She only knew that on a Tuesday evening in June, 3 weeks before the wedding, Corbin had come to her grandmother's house with his face the color of river stone, had told her he could not marry her, could not explain why, could not ever see her again. He had set a small velvet box on the kitchen table, the engagement ring inside it, and he had walked out into the summer dusk, and within a month his entire family had left Willowmere and moved west, and Rosalind had never heard his voice again. The story that had spread through the town afterward had been carefully engineered. It had been said that Rosalind had been caught in an indiscretion, that she had been unfaithful to Corbin with a traveling salesman from Concord, that the Lachapelles, being a decent Catholic family, had done what any decent family would do. Nobody had believed it entirely, and nobody had disbelieved it entirely, which was the beauty of the thing. The rumor had simply floated in the air around her for the rest of that year, stinging her like mosquitoes, until Rosalind had become a woman people pitied and avoided in equal measure. And then, with perfect, patient timing, Garrick Thatcher had arrived with flowers once more, steady and sympathetic, a good man who did not care about rumors. Rosalind had married him a year later in a small civil ceremony at the courthouse, wearing a pale blue suit. Her grandmother had not attended. Philomena had stood on the porch of the farmhouse and wept, and when Rosalind had asked her why she would not come, Philomena had only said, "Child, I cannot bless what I cannot bear to watch." Rosalind had not understood those words for 46 years. Kneeling in the cellar now, the wedding dress crushed against her face, she finally understood them completely. Rosalind sat with the dress in her lap for a long time. The cellar was cool around her, and the flashlight beam had steadied into a calm yellow pool on the packed earth floor. Somewhere outside the door, a wind had risen, and the dry seed heads of late autumn asters were rattling softly against the stone. She would have sat there until morning, she thought. She would have wept herself hollow and curled up around the dress and waited for the cold to take her, because there was no place left in the world for her to go and no one left in it who wanted her. But Philomena had not brought her here to die in the dark. Rosalind ran her seamstress's fingers slowly over the bodice of the dress. The the way she had learned to assess a garment when she was still a girl at her grandmother's knee. She felt along the seams, the darts, the hem, checking the craftsmanship as though Philomena might be watching her from somewhere nearby, grading her work. And there, beneath the lace panel of the bodice, her fingers stopped. The lining was thicker than it should have been. Not by much. A half-centimeter of extra padding where the silk should have lain flat against the interior facing. Any other woman would not have noticed it. But Rosalind had been Philomena's pupil from the age of 7, and she knew every stitch her grandmother had ever laid down the way a musician knows the signature of a composer. She took up her small folding scissors once more. Her hands were no longer shaking. She turned the dress inside out, carefully, found a row of tiny hand stitches that did not match Philomena's usual work, and understood at once that these stitches were meant to be undone. They had been sewn with a loose running stitch, the kind used for basting, the kind that gives way with a single gentle pull. Rosalind pulled. The thread parted. The lining fell open. 3 envelopes slid out into her lap. They were yellowed with age, the paper brittle at the folds, but perfectly preserved by the dry cellar air and the tissue and the cedar. 2 of them were addressed in handwriting she did not know, one in a slanting male hand, one in a rounder feminine script. The 3rd envelope was larger, heavier, and addressed in handwriting she would have recognized on the other side of death. "For my Rosalind, when you are ready." She opened the 1st envelope, the one in the slanting male hand. A single sheet of typed paper on the thin onion skin of 1980s business correspondence, and a signature at the bottom in faded blue ink. "Mrs. Vaughn, I have decided to put down in writing what I will not have the courage to say in person. My name is Ignatius Moreau. I have served for 11 years as the personal accountant to Mr. Reginald Thatcher Sr. I am writing to you about your granddaughter, Rosalind, and about the matter of the La Chapelle family's departure from Willowmere in the summer of 1979. I was present at Mr. Thatcher's office on the afternoon he met with Corbin La Chapelle. I was asked to prepare certain documents. A calling in of the La Chapelle loan, a letter to the mills contractor, a transfer of deed authority regarding your own family's orchard property, signed by parties I do not believe ever actually signed it. I did as I was asked because I was afraid for my position and for my wife's health, and I have been ashamed of myself every day since. The young Mr. La Chapelle was threatened in my hearing with consequences to his family that I will not write down here. The rumors that spread about your granddaughter were composed in that office by Mr. Thatcher and a man from the church, and I typed them myself on the machine you see the imprint of in this letter. Mrs. Vaughn, your granddaughter is innocent. She has been innocent from the beginning. I am sorry I did not have the courage to say so when it mattered. I am sending this to you because I believe you are the only person in this town with both the knowledge to use it and the love to wait for the right moment. God forgive me. Ignatius Moreau." Rosalind set the letter down very carefully, as though it were made of ash. The 2nd envelope was from Perpetua Odiambo, who had worked as the Thatcher family's housekeeper for 19 years. Her letter was shorter, but no less devastating. She had overheard, on 3 separate occasions, Reginald Thatcher Sr. and his son Garrick discussing what they called the orchard acquisition. She had heard Reginald explain to his son, with the patience of a father teaching a trade, how to slowly transfer the Vaughn family's assets in a Thatcher control over a long marriage through careful use of joint account signatures and estate restructurings. She had heard Garrick laugh and ask how long it would take. She had heard Reginald answer, "A patient man can accomplish a great deal in 30 years, Garrick. The orchard will be ours before your mother is dead." Rosalind read the letter twice, then 3 times. The cellar was very quiet. The Thatchers had not stolen from her because Garrick had grown bored of her. The Thatchers had married her in order to steal from her. The entire 47 years of her life with Garrick, every anniversary dinner, every shared Christmas, every hand held in a hospital corridor, had been the patient execution of a plan drawn up in a wood-paneled office by a man who had died before she ever learned his face. She picked up the 3rd envelope, Philomena's envelope. Her hands were perfectly steady now. Philomena's letter was written on heavy cream stationery, the paper she had used for every birthday card, every Christmas note, every gentle correction sent to a granddaughter who had grown too proud in boarding school. The handwriting was slightly shakier than Rosalind remembered. It was the handwriting of a woman who had known she was running out of time. My beloved Rosalind, if you are reading this letter, it means the Thatcher family has done to you at last what I spent the final years of my life trying to prepare you to survive. I am so sorry, my darling girl. I'm so sorry I cannot stop them. I am sorry I could not even tell you clearly what was coming, because I feared that if I spoke of it aloud while I still drew breath, Reginald Thatcher would find a way to make me pay for my knowledge, and worse, to make you pay for it alongside me. By the time these letters found their way to me, the marriage had already happened. You had already become Mrs. Thatcher. You were building a life with a man you believed was kind. I agonized for weeks over whether to give you the letters then, to break your young heart with a truth you could not yet undo, or to hide them here, in the only place Reginald could never reach, and trust that you would find them on the day you most needed them. Reginald came to see me twice in the autumn of 1981. The second time, he threatened my life plainly. He said that if I spoke one word against him, accidents could happen on a farm, that old women who live alone were known to fall, that house fires were difficult to investigate in rural counties. A year later, as you know, the farmhouse burned. I am writing this letter from a cousin's house in Concord, where I have fled for what I already know will be the last weeks of my life. The fire will come soon. I can feel it waiting. Reginald has made certain I will not outlive my knowledge of him. I'm telling you this, my Rosalind, not to frighten you, but so that you understand what kind of family you have been married into, and so that you understand what kind of courage you will need in order to face them. The orchard is still yours. Whatever papers they showed you, whatever signatures they forged, the original deed is held in trust by a firm in Boston that has instructions not to release it to anyone but you, in person, with this letter in hand. The firm is called Pelletier and Stroud. Ask for Obadiah Lindqvist. He will know what to do. My darling, with a dress. Walk in the place where they are gathered and wear it. Let them see what they took from you and what they failed to bury. Truth that has waited 50 years is the hardest kind of truth to kill. I love you more than these failing hands can write. I'm sorry I cannot fight better for you. But perhaps you can finish the fight I started, and perhaps that will be enough to set us both free at last. Your grandmother, Philomena. Rosalind folded the letter carefully along its original creases. She placed all 3 letters back into their envelopes. She sat in the yellow pool of flashlight beam for a long while, not crying, not thinking, simply breathing in the apple blossom dark. Then she looked at the wedding dress in her lap. Tomorrow was Sunday, and Sunday, in Willowmere, was the opening day of the annual Harvest Festival in the town square, the largest public gathering of the year, the one event at which every family in the county would be present, including, without question, Garrick Thatcher and his smiling fiancée, who would be there as the sponsors of the cider-pressing tent, as they had been every autumn for the past 15 years. Rosalind needed to look like a woman whose words could not be dismissed, and she had, quite literally, the dress. She worked through the night by flashlight. She used her folding scissors and a needle and the small spool of heavy thread she always carried, because a seamstress always carries thread. She did not alter the dress the way Mary Sullivan had altered hers. She did something different. She lengthened the sleeves with a strip of tissue paper binding. She cut the long skirt shorter to mid-calf, a more deliberate length. She replaced the high lace collar with a simple clean neckline cut from the hem she had shortened. She pressed the fabric as best she could with her hands against the stone of a cellar shelf. When dawn came pale and cold through the cracks of the cellar door, Rosalind stood in the middle of the stone chamber in a dress that looked no longer like a 1979 wedding gown, but like a quiet, dignified, ceremonial garment of no particular decade. The cream silk still held its faint scent of apple blossom. The French-knotted apple flowers along the hem caught the first light like small living stars. She braided her long silver hair into a simple crown at the back of her head, the way her grandmother used to braid it when she was a child. She slipped her mother's pearl earrings through her ears. She gathered the 3 letters into a cloth pouch and tied the pouch to her wrist with a length of cellar twine. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was. a woman who had walked out of the earth to speak. She pushed open the cellar door, and she stepped into the morning. The Willowmere town square had been filling since 7 that morning. Hay bales had been arranged into seating along the gazebo. The Methodist Women's Guild had set up long tables of pumpkin bread and apple cider donuts. Children in wool sweaters were chasing each other between the pumpkin stacks, and over by the cider-pressing tent at the center of the square, the heart of the whole festival, a brass banner read "Sponsored with love by the Thatcher family." 47 years of Willowmere tradition. Rosalind walked into the square at 5 minutes past 9. She did not hurry. She did not falter. The cream silk of the dress caught the cold morning light as she crossed the cobblestone walk, the little embroidered apple blossoms glinting along her hem. And the first person to notice her was a child of perhaps 7, holding a caramel apple, who stopped chewing and tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed. The mother looked. Her face went still. The stillness spread. By the time Rosalind reached the center of the square had gone quiet. Not completely. The brass quartet was still playing a slow rendition of Shenandoah, and somewhere a toddler was crying about a dropped cookie. But the adult conversation, the laughter, the easy Sunday murmur of 400 people had folded itself down into silence. Rosalind walked up to the cider-pressing tent and stopped 3 feet from Garrick Thatcher. He was wearing a camel-colored wool coat and a pumpkin orange scarf that Camilla had clearly chosen. He was holding a glass mug of hot mulled cider. When he turned and saw her standing there in the cream dress with the silver crown of hair, the mug did not fall from his hand, but his hand, Rosalind noticed with a cold satisfaction, began to shake so finely that the cider trembled at the rim. "Rosalind." His voice was low and careful. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning, Garrick," Rosalind said, and her own voice surprised her by the way it carried, clear and unhurried, across the hushed square. "I came to return something, and to tell these people something your father spent a great deal of money to ensure they would never hear." Camilla, who had been adjusting a stack of paper cups at the press, looked up and laughed, a quick light laugh meant to reassure the watching crowd. "Oh dear, Roz, sweetheart, you've had a rough week, I understand, but this is not the place. Let's call Trixie, shall we? Let's get you home." "This is not your home, Camilla," Rosalind said, not unkindly, but with the quiet finality of a door closing. "And I am not your sweetheart." She turned to face the crowd. She raised her voice only slightly. She did not need a shout. The square was holding its breath for her. 46 years ago, in the summer of 1979, I was engaged to a young man named Corbin LaChapelle. Many of you here are old enough to remember him. Many of you, I suspect, also remember the rumors that drove him and his family out of Willowmere 3 weeks before a wedding. Rumors that I had been unfaithful to him. Rumors that I was a woman of poor character. Rumors that I have carried on my back for nearly half a century. She drew the cloth pouch from her wrist. She held it up. The man who invented those rumors was Reginald Thatcher Sr. He invented them because I had refused to marry his son. He invented them because he wanted this orchard. She gestured behind her, toward the distant hillside where the Vaughn land sloped away from the town. He invented them because he had already drawn up the plan by which his son would court me after the wedding was destroyed, marry me after the town had pitted me enough, and spend the following 40 years systematically stealing my family's property through forged signatures and falsified trust documents. A small sound rose from the crowd. Not quite gasp, not quite murmur. A collective inhalation. "I did not know this until yesterday," Rosalind continued. "I did not know this because my grandmother Philomena, who learned of it in 1981, was threatened into silence by Mr. Thatcher and burned alive in her own farmhouse the following year for the crime of knowing too much. She hid the evidence before she died. She hid it in the one place he could not reach. I found it last night." She opened the pouch. She lifted the 3 envelopes into the light. "I have a letter from Ignatius Moreau, who was Reginald Thatcher's personal accountant for 11 years, detailing how the rumors about me were composed in Mr. Thatcher's office and typed on his own typewriter. I have a letter from Perpetua Odiembo, the Thatcher family's housekeeper of 19 years, who overheard Reginald instructing his son Garrick on how to slowly transfer my family's assets in a Thatcher control over the course of a long marriage. And I have a letter from my grandmother, written days before her death, naming all of it plainly. She turned back to Garrick. I have sent copies of all 3 letters this morning to Obadiah Lindqvist of Pelletier and Stroud in Boston, to the Willowmere Gazette, and to the State Attorney General's office. Garrick had gone the color of old paper. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the cobblestones. Hot cider pooled around his expensive leather shoes. He opened his mouth to speak, and no sound came out. You have one chance, Garrick, Rosalind said softly. Tell these people here now whether what I have just said is true. The whole square waited. Garrick Thatcher opened his mouth and closed it and opened it again. My father, he finally said, and his voice was the cracked voice of a man falling from a great height. My father did what he had to do. He built everything we have. You don't understand, Roz. You never understood. Did he forge my signature on a 1992 trust restructuring? Rosalind asked quietly. Garrick's face collapsed. The carefully composed features of 40 years dissolved in an instant. And in their place, Rosalind saw, finally, the small and frightened man her husband had always been underneath. Yes, he whispered. The crowd heard it. The small boy with the caramel apple heard it. The brass quartet had stopped playing. Even the wind seemed to have gone still. Did your father murder my grandmother? A long silence. Garrick's lips were trembling. I don't know, he said. I was 26. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Rosalind nodded slowly. She looked out at the hushed crowd, at the faces she had known for 50 years, and the faces of their children and their children's children, and she said, quite simply, thank you for listening. Then she turned and walked back across the cobblestones the way she had come, and no one in the square moved until she was gone from sight. The story broke that same evening. A woman named Zuri Achabi, a young reporter for the Willowmere Gazette who had been home visiting her parents and happened to be at the festival, had filmed the entire confrontation on her phone. The video was posted online by 10 o'clock that night. By Monday morning, it had been watched 1.4 million times. By Tuesday, the Attorney General's office had announced a formal investigation into the Thatcher family's financial dealings and into the unsolved 1982 farmhouse fire that had killed Philomena Vaughn. By Thursday, Garrick had been arrested. Obadiah Lindqvist of Pelletier and Stroud, who turned out to be a very tall, very patient man with a soft Minnesota accent, drove up from Boston that same Thursday afternoon to meet Rosalind at Hetty Stroud's little cafe. He brought with him a folder an inch and a half thick, the original deed to the Vaughn Orchard, held in trust by his firm for 50 years, exactly as Philomena had arranged. Proof of the forged transfers. The legal foundation for what would eventually become the largest civil recovery in the history of the county. Rosalind's daughter Trixie came to the cafe on Saturday. She sat across from her mother with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands and said, Mom, we didn't know. Finian and I truly didn't know. Dad told us you were losing your mind. He had documents. He had the accountant backing him up. We believed him because we wanted to. I know, Rosalind said. That is what I find hardest to forgive, Trixie. Not that you disbelieved me. That you wanted to. Can we try again? Rosalind looked at her daughter for a long moment. She thought about the dance recital costumes, the asthma attacks. She thought about Philomena, who had forgiven her own granddaughter for marrying the wrong man, and who had hidden the means of that granddaughter's salvation in a cedar crate with the patience of genuine love. We could try, Rosalind said. On my terms. Slowly. You will need to prove yourselves, and I will not pretend the last 30 years did not happen. But yes, we could try. The civil settlement was finalized in the spring. The number was significant enough that Rosalind never had to think about money again, and had enough left over to do what she had wanted to do since the moment she stepped out of the cellar. She restored the orchard. She hired young local families to help her clear the overgrowth and prune the ancient apple trees back into health. She rebuilt the farmhouse, not grand, just a simple 2-story clapboard house on the original fieldstone foundation, with a wide kitchen window where the afternoon light would fall across a sewing table. She renamed the property. The old hand-painted sign at the gate now read Philomena's Orchard. Rosalind did not remarry. She did not date. She planted roses along the driveway and learned to graft young apple trees and took back her maiden name on the afternoon the judge signed the final paperwork. Vaughn, she wrote in the careful hand her grandmother had taught her. Rosalind Vaughn. The wedding dress she had cleaned and framed and hung in the restored farmhouse hallway, not as a shrine to what was taken, but as a quiet daily reminder of what had waited for her in the dark. Corbin LaChapelle, it turned out, had become a stonemason in British Columbia. He had married a kind woman and had 3 children. He read about Rosalind's confrontation on a Canadian news site 2 weeks after it happened. He wrote her a letter. She wrote one back. They exchanged letters for the rest of his life, and though they never met again, Rosalind kept every one of his envelopes in a cedar box beside her bed. One spring afternoon, 2 years after the confrontation, her son Finian brought his 4-year-old daughter Wren to the orchard. Wren wanted to help Rosalind plant the new saplings. She wanted to know the name of every tree. She wanted to know why Grandma's dress was in a frame on the wall. Rosalind took her small granddaughter's hand, led her out into the blossoming rose, and began, slowly and patiently, to tell her story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.